Okay, so you know how this works. You send us those articles, those books, those things you're reading, the stuff that makes you think, and we take a look.
Yeah, we dive in.
Yeah, we do a deep dive and pull out the interesting bits, the parts that you can actually use.
The stuff that'll change how you see things.
Exactly. So you can get seriously informed without having to read everything yourself.
Like a shortcut to knowledge.
Right, exactly. And today we've got something pretty different, actually. It's an e-booklet someone sent us. It's called bodyguardtraining.pdf by a guy named Keith Pascal.
Oh, yeah. Keith's interesting. He's a martial artist, but he's also spent some time around, professional bodyguards.
Yeah, and this booklet, it lays out some exercises that he's developed.
Sort of practical stuff,
Yeah, but here's the thing. He's very upfront about the fact that this isn't official bodyguard training.
He even kind of apologizes to any real bodyguards out there who might, think it's a little basic.
He does. But the thing that I found really interesting is that he really believes that these exercises are useful, genuinely useful for martial artists who are interested in one very specific part of what bodyguards do.
Which is?
Moving someone safely through a crowd.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and get this, he even got a thumbs up from an actual bodyguard in Hawaii, so we thought, hey, why not take a deep dive into this and see what we can learn about navigating crowds,
And maybe even some broader stuff about personal safety, right?
Exactly. So that's the mission today. So the booklet outlines 3 exercises, so we're going to go through those and, see what we can uncover.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, so exercise 1 is called finding a wave in the crowd.
Finding a wave. Huh. Sounds like we should be grabbing a surfboard.
I know, right? I had the same thought.
So what's the idea here?
Well, it's about finding those little pockets of space in a crowd,
Okay, so working with the crowd's movement instead of just trying to push against it.
Exactly. And he actually ties this back to an article he wrote for Martial Arts Mastery, Easing, about finding your opponent's wave in a fight.
Their wave.
Yeah, those moments when they're off balance or when they create an opening,
I see.
And he's saying that moving through a crowd, it's actually kind of similar. It's not just random movement. There are these patterns and flows.
It's like, if we zoom out a bit, it's like understanding flow and resistance in any system, right? Think about how you navigate a busy airport.
Or even how information moves through a big organization.
Exactly. If you can spot those waves, those moments of movement or communication, you can be way more efficient.
Yeah, and he gives this great example with his wife, Kate. Apparently, they've gotten really good at navigating concerts, sports events, even county fairs.
By doing what?
By actively looking for those pockets of space and constantly adjusting their speed and their angle. They're flowing through the crowd without bumping into anyone.
So instead of just barging through, you're being more strategic.
Yeah, exactly. So he breaks this down into 3 stages. The first stage is all about getting a feel for this by yourself. So he suggests practicing in crowded places, but, relatively low-stakes environments like school hallways between classes, shopping malls, maybe a flea market.
Got it.
The point is to really focus on finding those gaps and moving quickly and confidently, but without being, super obvious about it.
So it becomes like second nature.
Right, exactly. And then stage 2, this is where it gets really interesting. You start practicing with someone else.
Okay, so you're adding another layer of complexity.
Yeah, he suggests using a child or a friend who's maybe a little clumsy, or even someone who can role play as the person you're protecting.
So somebody who might need a bit more guidance.
Right, and it really highlights the fact that moving with someone else, it's a whole different ballgame than just moving on your own.
You have to coordinate, you have to communicate.
Exactly, and Keith really stresses the importance of having pre-agreed instructions for the person you're with.
Like what kind of instruction?
Yeah, things like, how you want them to walk, how close they should stay, what to do if something happens, the speed you're aiming for, and how you'll signal them to speed up or slow down.
It's like a set of nonverbal cues.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've been in those situations where you're trying to keep a group together in a crowd and it feels impossible. So this idea of clear communication beforehand, it makes a lot of sense.
It's about proactive communication, right? Which is important for anything where you're guiding someone, whether it's a crowd or a team project. Setting expectations beforehand can prevent a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And then stage 3, this is where he brings in peripheral vision.
Interesting. How does that work?
So he says to specifically pay attention to the 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock positions, if you think about it like an analog clock.
Okay.
The idea is to see people coming from the sides before they're right next to you. He even says that trying to widen that focus to 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock actually made it harder to be aware of both sides at once.
So it's about finding that sweet spot for your attention.
Yeah, and he's clear that this doesn't mean you can ignore what's right next to you, but it does reduce the mental effort of like constantly scanning everything.
I could see that.
And his overall recommendation for this first exercise is to practice for about 20 minutes each day for a month. And he says you should see a noticeable improvement in how smoothly you can move through crowds.
Makes sense. Consistent practice is key for building any skill, especially something like this where it's about observation and reaction.
Okay, so let's move on to exercise 2. This one's called guarding the rear.
Okay, guarding the rear. So now we're thinking about protecting someone from behind.
Exactly, because you can't just be focused on what's in front of you.
Right, especially if you're responsible for someone's safety. You have to consider all angles.
So Keith lays out 2 main ways to position yourself relative to the person you're with. The first one is having them slightly in front and to your side with your hand on their back, kind of for guidance.
Okay, so you can steer them a bit?
Yeah, and the second way is having them directly behind you, which provides the most protection from anything coming straight at you.
Got it.
He says he generally prefers the first option because it gives you more overall awareness, but he acknowledges that in some situations, like if you're protecting someone famous from a mob of fans, having them directly behind you might be the better call.
It depends on the context, right?
Exactly. And the main technique he focuses on for dealing with threats from behind is the back kick.
Ah, classic.
And he describes 2 variations depending on how you're positioned relative to the person you're with. So if they're behind you, it's a full back kick. He actually calls it a donkey kick, where you make contact with your heel and your toes are pointing down.
Okay.
He's really big on getting good extension and power into that kick.
You got to make it count.
Yeah, and if the person you're protecting is in front of you, the back kick changes. It becomes a shorter, more controlled movement. You lift your heel by bending your knee and you aim for the attacker's groin area.
So it's more about precision than power.
Right, exactly. And he also points out that the knee or the shin can be good alternative targets for the back kick in either scenario.
So you've got options depending on the situation.
Yeah, and the way to practice this is to have a partner come at you from behind, holding a focus mitt in different positions.
Okay.
And the important part is learning to execute those back kicks accurately without hitting the person you're supposed to be protecting.
Yeah. Friendly fire is definitely not what you want.
No, not at all. So exercise 2 really builds on the first one. You're taking that smooth forward movement from navigating the waves, and then you're adding this layer of defense against threats from behind.
It's about creating a 360-degree sense of security.
Exactly. Okay, ready for exercise 3?
Hit me with it.
Okay, this one is called the next level.
Yeah.
The grab.
The grab. Okay, so now we're getting into actual physical contact.
Yeah, this is about dealing with that situation where someone reaches out towards the person you're with and their intention isn't clear.
Right. It could be innocent or it could be something more aggressive.
And you have to respond in a way that's professional and doesn't immediately escalate things.
That makes sense.
So Keith's first suggestion isn't to go straight for a knockout punch or something. Instead, he recommends using wrist locks, or at least the beginning of a wrist lock, to gently guide the hand away.
So it's about redirection.
Yeah, at this stage, it's a deflection, not a full lock, because you don't know yet if they're actually going to grab or what they're really trying to do.
Right. You're using the minimum amount of force necessary.
Exactly. But he's clear that if an actual grab does happen, whether it's on the person you're protecting or even their stuff, the response needs to escalate.
Okay, how so?
He suggests moving to a more complete wrist lock or a joint lock, maybe even an arm bar.
So you're taking control of the situation.
Right, and he actually mentions being cautious about striking at this point because of legal issues. He prefers the control that locking techniques provide.
Interesting. So it's about minimizing risk on multiple levels.
Exactly, and he makes a good point that a grab, in a way, it gives you an opportunity to apply a lock because the person grabbing there focused on making contact, and that can leave their wrist or arm vulnerable.
They're not thinking about defending against a joint lock.
Right. And to practice this exercise, Keith suggests using 2 partners. One person acts as the client and the other tries to grab them, and the protector practices removing the threat with a wrist lock.
It's about getting that muscle memory.
Yeah, and he distinguishes between brushing a hand away early on, which could transition into a lock, and responding directly to a grab with an immediate lock.
So you have different options depending on how the situation unfolds.
Right. But the goal is always to control the situation without resorting to striking if possible.
So bringing it all together, Keith presents these 3 exercises as a kind of progression.
Exactly. You start with mastering movement through crowds, Then you add protection from behind, and then you learn to deal with direct contact.
And while he's very clear that this isn't like a full-on bodyguard training program, it does offer some practical skills for martial artists, security personnel, anyone who might need to guide someone through a crowd.
And if you're interested in learning more about those wrist lock techniques, he has a whole book on it. It's called Wrist Locks, From Protecting Yourself to Becoming an Expert.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and he mentions that there are also some free reports on martial arts and self-defense. You can find all that on his website. It's http://www.kerwinbenson.com/?bodyguard.
A bit of a mouthful, but I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, thanks. And he also gives his email address if you have any questions or comments. It's pascal@kerwinbenson.com.
Always good to see an author who's open to feedback.
So as you're thinking about all this, it's interesting to consider how these principles, these core ideas of observing your environment, positioning yourself strategically, and responding to contact with control, how they could apply to other areas of life, not just crowds.
All right, like thinking about situational awareness in general.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you think about being more aware of your surroundings and having a plan even in everyday situations.
It's about being proactive instead of reactive.
And it's fascinating how principles from one specific area like bodyguarding can actually offer these really useful insights for navigating all kinds of social and physical environments.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting and responding to different kinds of pressure in a way that keeps you and those around you safe.
Food for thought, right?
Definitely.
All right, well, that's our deep dive into Keith Pascal's Bodyguard Training.
Thanks for taking the plunge with us.
Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
And keep those sources coming.
We'll be diving in soon.
See you then.